can create our template for our slab, we need to create a square out of a piece of paper. So take a regular piece of computer paper or notebook paper. You're going to grab the bottom side and you're going to fold it up and line it up with the top edge of the paper. It will look like a triangle. Then you're going to cut the rectangle piece that is kind of hanging off to the side. We don't need that, and when you open this back up, you'll have a square that's ready to create your slab template. Before we start measuring, you're going to want to make sure that you study your ruler first. When you're using your ruler, you want to make sure you're lining it up properly against the edge of the paper. But sometimes measurements on a ruler don't start at the very end or the edge of the ruler. It might be just slightly in, just a bit. This is more common on plastic rulers, so make sure, again, that you study your ruler first before you begin the measurement process. We will be using the measurements 1 1/4, 5 1/2, and 1 1/2 inches. So make sure that you're aware of where these measurements are on your ruler. You're going to start with the measurement 1 1/4 of an inch. You're going to line your ruler up at the corner and measure over. Your next measurement is going to be 5 1/2. You're going to measure on the vertical side of your paper. Make sure your paper is lined up properly and mark 5 1/2 inches. Now you're going to use the measurement 1 1/2 inches, and you're going to mark this above the 5 1/2 inch mark. This is telling you where you're going to connect the top measurement and the bottom measurement. So you're connecting your 1 1/4 mark and your 1 1/2 mark, and you're going to create a line. Next, you rotate your paper and you repeat the exact same process all the way around. We're starting with 1 1/4, vertically 5 1/2, you're going to do another horizontal measurement above the 5 1/2 inch mark, and now connect your 1 1/4 measurement with your 1 1/2 inch measurement. Rotate, repeat. Repeat this process until you get back to the first measurement that you made on your piece of paper. At this point, you're going to need your scissors, and you're going to cut along the line that you just measured out. Mine is in Sharpie, so you can actually see it in the video. However, you can just keep your pencil lines. Cut along your lines all the way around your piece of paper. It is always nice to have a model of what your clay form should look like. If you're short on time, this step is not necessary. However, walking through the process in paper first will make it easier when you move on to clay, because this way your mind and your hands are ready and they know what to expect. I'm going to demonstrate what your clay slab should look like after you put it together in paper form. Notice that I'm overlapping the end pieces on the strips. Because you're making an origami style plate, this is going to be a focal point, so be sure to pay attention to this section. Now what you have is a visual representation of what your slab plate should look like. I do encourage you to make the paper model so you have a reference while you're actually building in clay. However, if you do this, you will need to make another template to use on your clay slab. So now we're ready to start in clay. If you do not have a canvas surface, then you're going to want to put some saran wrap down or a plastic bag or some kind of barrier so your clay does not stick to the surface of your workspace. At this point, we're ready to stretch out our clay. I am using a block of clay that's about 2.5 inches thick. So just kind of cut it off your brick that you have. And we're going to stretch it, and notice kind of my hand placement. So I'm going to toss the clay down and then pull it towards my belly. It does take practice, but once you get into the rhythm of it, it becomes pretty natural. You also want to take the time to stop and tap the sides of your bricks of clay because that will keep the edges from cracking. If you feel like you've stretched it out so it's just a little bit smaller than your stencil, then you're probably ready to go ahead and use your dowel rods and your rolling pin. But if it's still quite a bit smaller than your stencil, then keep going and keep stretching out that clay by throwing it on the table and pulling it towards your belly. Don't forget to take the time to tap the sides so it keeps it compressed and you don't have a bunch of cracks on the edges after you roll it out. You can see that my slab is just slightly bigger than my stencil, so I'm going to stretch it just maybe 1 or 2 more times before I roll it. At this point, you want the dowel rods to be on both sides of your clay, and you want the rolling pin to be sitting on top of your dowel rods or your piece of plywood or whatever it is that you're using to create the thickness of your slab. Because that's what's keeping the clay from being uneven. This is allowing you to have an incredibly even piece of slab all the way across. So it's really important that you keep the rolling pin on top of the dowel rods as you are rolling this out. I'm going to once again check my stencil on top of my slab, and this would probably work. I'm going to give myself just a little bit more room just to be sure. So I went ahead and stretched that one more time, and then I'm going to roll it out again, keeping my rolling pin on top of those dowel rods. The middle, I was unable to do that, so I had to be a little bit careful, but just be aware of your pressure. And then I'm going to check it again here with my stencil, and it's going to fit just perfectly. So now my slab is ready to be ribbed and smoothed out with a sponge. Don't rush through this part of the project because this is where you're compressing the clay. And if you don't have like an official ceramic tool, I was just showing you how to make a rib out of like a gift card or an old credit card or anything that's got a hard straight edge. You can turn it into a rib. Here I'm showing you how to use your popsicle stick. So as long as it has a straight edge, you can compress that clay, checking for those little air pockets that you might have. If you do have any, just kind of pop it with a toothpick or a needle tool and just really compress that clay so you don't end up with any cracks or air bubbles. Make sure that you compress both sides of your clay with your rib and your sponge just to make sure that the clay is super compressed and that you have eliminated any possibility of air pockets. Once you have everything ribbed and compressed, you're ready to use your stencil to cut out your shape. So we're going to set the stencil right in the middle of our slab, and you're going to need your ruler. If you have a felting knife or a butter knife or an X-Acto knife, anything that has kind of a sharp edge, you can even use a needle tool. That will work perfectly fine to get this shape cut out. But make sure you use a ruler. Don't try to freehand this because you're probably going to mess up your straight edge. And the straight edge in this particular design is really important. So take your time, go slow, and make sure that the edges are nice and straight. Notice that I have my ruler on top of my piece of paper versus having the ruler on the clay lined up against the paper. And the reason I'm doing that is because if you do it the other way and put the ruler on the clay, then you're going to mess up your paper stencil. It's going to wrinkle and probably tear. So set the ruler on top of the paper and line it up to the edge and then cut. Now what we're going to do is line our ruler up with the inside lines because this is what's going to create the origami shape. So once again, line your ruler up right on the line and cut really carefully. Don't rush through this. Make a slow cut so it's nice and straight. Do this all the way around your square. Now you can remove your stencil from your slab, and at this point we're ready to go ahead and apply our texture to our origami plate. Once you've decided what your texture is going to be, you're going to apply it to the outside edges of your plate. So don't go past the area where you can see your lines. We're going to leave the middle of your plate plain. That way you can use it, because if you have texture in the middle of your plate and you do plan on utilizing it, food and liquid can get stuck in that textured area and it's just a little bit hard to clean. So stay on the outside edge of the plate itself. If for some reason the texture that you're using is getting stuck to the clay, you can use cornstarch. You would just dust it on your clay or the object that you're applying texture with, or you could even use clay dust. So either one of those would work. You could also lay down a piece of saran wrap on top of the slab itself and apply your texture on top of the saran wrap. Any one of those techniques would work if the object that you're using is sticking to the clay. And sometimes that does occur if the clay is really wet. You're going to apply texture all the way around the 4 sides of your plate. If you do happen to mess up your texture, it's okay, you can still fix it. You would just use your straight edge, your rib, your scraper, whatever it is that you're using, and you would smooth that area back out. Just be careful with the amount of pressure that you're applying if you do this, because you want to try to keep your slab as even as possible all the way around. If you notice that your edges got a little bit wobbly while you were adding your texture, you can line your ruler back up really close to the edge and recut so you have a straight edge going all the way around your slab. We're ready to go ahead and construct the plate itself. So we need to figure out where we're going to put our scoring and slipping lines. So we're going to take one of the tabs and we're going to pull it over on top of the other corner that's across from it. And you're going to just draw yourself a little guideline. So notice I'm picking up that piece of slab and I'm putting it over the corner, and now I'm drawing myself a line. I'm going to do the same thing all the way around the plate so I know exactly where to put my scoring and my slip. Once your guidelines are created, you're going to put your slip inside that area all the way around, and then you will score the area where you have your slip. You can do it in either order. I just like to put the slip down first. That way I don't smooth in my scoring lines. When you're scoring, try not to get the scoring lines on your texture. So if you need to move those tabs out of the way, they'll be fine, they can handle it. Just push them out a little bit further. You also need to score and slip the bottom piece of your tab. Remember, wherever two pieces of clay touch and are going to be attached, you need to score and slip. After you have the first corner attached, do the opposite corner of your slab. When you're attaching this, be sure to press with enough pressure that the two pieces of slab are going to be put together and you have slip kind of oozing out the cracks. Continue this process all the way around your slab until you have all four corners connected, and then we'll go back and we'll continue compressing the seams so that the way the slab doesn't fall apart and your construction is complete. Once you have all four corners connected, it's a good idea to go back and check them. If you need to do any kind of readjustment, now's the time to do that. Just kind of look to make sure they're all even and in the right spot. If you have scoring lines that are showing, that's not a big deal because you can always smooth that out and then reapply texture if you desire. In this section of the video, I'm showing you how to apply texture to the entire slab. We'll still go in and we'll remove the texture from the center of the plate, but if you have some kind of application and it's just easier to apply the whole thing at once, that is something that you're able to do. At this point, I'm just going to redo what I showed in the last section of the video. I'm going to lay down my stencil, I'm going to cut it out, and I'm going to go ahead and cut the sections for the tabs of the plate as well. I'm going to show you an additional way to figure out how to draw where you need to score and slip whenever you're connecting your tabs. This might just be a little bit easier for some of you if you're not very good at eyeballing. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to line up our tabs all the way around the plate, exactly where we kind of want them for the most part, and then we're going to use a pencil to draw that line on both sides of that tab. That's going to give you a really accurate area that you're going to score and slip. You're going to do this all the way around the plate. Once you have everything marked out, you're going to go ahead, score, slip, attach your pieces, and compress. Make sure that that slip is kind of oozing out. Apply with enough pressure that the two pieces are staying together, but not so hard that you're messing with the thickness of the slab itself. Try to keep it as even as possible. Sometimes it's helpful to place like a crumbled up piece of paper towel underneath the corners to help hold it up while you're placing the rest of the corners in the right spot. I tend to do this. I think it just gives it some extra support and allows you to work the bottom of the slab so you make sure it's compressed really well. Notice how my bottom piece of slab has a gap? I want to make sure that I seal that up. So sometimes the slabs kind of pull apart as you're working, but I need to make sure that that is sealed. So I'm going to go back through and I'm going to make sure that I compress that really, really well. Using my fingers, I'm going to use my paintbrush. I'm also going to use my popsicle stick that I cut into an angle to help compress these two pieces together. Make sure that you do this on all 4 sides of your plate before you move on to the next step. For this particular plate, I need to get rid of the texture that's in the middle because, like I've said before, if we're going to actually use this as a functional plate, we don't want that texture in the middle because it will get pretty nasty with food and liquid. You won't be able to get it out. So I'm just using my rib tool and I'm just smoothing out that texture, removing it. So I'm applying a little bit of pressure in order to get rid of that. Then I'll use my sponge and my paintbrush to get rid of any kind of texture that's left near the edge of the slab pieces. Just keep doing this, repeating the process until it's completely gone. I'm going to use my homemade tool. I'm going to put the corner of the tool into the seam where the 2 pieces of slab come together. I'm going to apply just a slight amount of pressure, and what's happening is the 2 pieces of clay are blending together. You're going to do this all the way around on all 4 sides. Seam doesn't seem to be filling in with the clay, sometimes it's beneficial to pull clay from the slab that is on top down onto the center section of your slab plate. And then you would just continue the smoothing portion by sticking the pointed end of your tool and smoothing that area back out right into the seam. Once you feel like you have the seams connected properly, don't forget to go back in and smooth out that center section of your plate with something that has a straight edge, and then go back over it with your sponge so it's nice and smooth and you've removed all the crumbs. Once you have the seams connected, you're going to go back in with a paintbrush that's dipped in water, and we're just going to do one final kind of seal around where the two pieces of clay come together. This will also help remove any crumbs that might have been left behind from connecting the two pieces together. Finally, you'll want to go in with a wet fingertip and just kind of round out the side edges of your slab pieces. It just gives it a more finished look. At this point, we need to seal the seams on the bottom of the plate, so you're going to need to prop your plate up off your tabletop. I'm just using a glaze jar, so anything that you can use, as long as it's going to support your slab, will work just fine. Just make sure that it's elevated so you're not bending the front or the top of your plate. We want to do the same thing that we did on the front of the plate. We want to make sure that these two pieces of slab are completely together. We want to eliminate any space that might be between them. Sometimes it's helpful to go ahead and smooth out the corner where the two pieces are still connected, and then go in with your tool and bring the two seams together. Once the seam is compressed together, you're going to take your paintbrush and smooth out that edge, removing any crumbs, and just really compressing to make sure that the seams are not going to pop apart. Don't forget to use a wet fingertip to kind of round out the edges of the slab once you have the seam put together and complete. You're going to repeat this process all the way around your plate. You have two seams on each side. You have a big one and you have a small one. Simply repeat the process. You do it exactly the same to each of them. At this point, you're going to want to set your plate aside and roll out a new piece of slab if you didn't keep any extra pieces. And we're going to create the little slab sections for the foot of your plate. Now notice that I'm just using a corn on the cob holder to make these little slivers. But if you don't have one of those, you can use any kind of sharp tool to cut little strips. And these are only about 1/8 of an inch wide, but you can make them a little bit wider if you need to. So you could go as wide as, 1/4. I wouldn't make them a 1/2 inch. That's going to be way too big. You need 4 strips. Once you get your 4 strips cut out, you're going to want to line them up and cut them vertically so they are all the exact same length. Your strips need to be about 2.5 to 3 inches long in order to be sufficient for the foot of your plate. If your strips do seem a little bit uneven or have some crumbs, now is the time that you would want to smooth them. So just wet your fingertip and smooth out those areas. Then line them up and cut them so they're even. It's a good idea to take a minute and kind of mockily set up what the foot will look like. That way if you need to make any adjustments, you can do it at this time. Once you have your foot prepped, you're going to want to use a tool to mark where the foot's going to go. So we're just going to put some holes at each corner. Make sure it's going through to the foot so you know where to place everything. Now you're going to elevate the bowl plate once again, and you're going to kind of mockily put your pieces to the foot on the base. You're using the holes as a guide. Sometimes they're not as accurate as you would think, so you do have to move the slab strips around so that it is more proportion and your plate isn't teetering when you go to use it. You'll notice that my slab strips were too long, so I'm just making some adjustments and I'm cutting them a little bit shorter so they actually fit in the middle of the foot and not towards the outside. Once you're happy with the placement of your foot, you're going to take your needle tool or a pencil and you're going to trace along the inside and the outside of your slab strips. Because we're going to be attaching the strips to the foot of the plate, we want to go ahead and score and slip this area on the foot and on the strips themselves. Lay the strip on the foot of your plate and apply pressure. Make sure you don't have any space between the foot of the plate and the strip. Repeat this process all the way around until you have all of the strips placed on the foot. Just like you did on the seams of your plate, you're going to take your tool and you're going to compress the two seams. Do this on the inside and the outside. Be sure to smoothen the seam that's on the top section so it looks like it's one piece going all the way around. Once you have that completed, take your paintbrush, wet it, and solidify all the seams and compress them just one last time. When you're finished, do not turn your plate over to set on the foot. These slabs are too moist, and if you do that, you're going to squish them. If you have access to a heat gun or a hair dryer, you're going to want to put some hot air on this to stiffen those pieces up, or you can let your piece dry for about 30 minutes in this position and then cover. When you flip your plate back over, you're going to notice an imprint from whatever you had it elevated on. Simply take your rib tool or your scraper and smooth this section out. After you've smoothed it, make sure you go back over it with your paintbrush or your sponge so it's nice and smooth and you've removed any crumbs. This is where you're going to do any last minute touch-ups before you set it out to dry. If you're having trouble getting the crumbs in the corner smoothed out, use the rounded end of your popsicle stick to help you smooth these. Then go back in with your paintbrush to smooth them out the rest of the way. After letting your plate sit with plastic draped over it for one day, go back in and do any last-minute detailed touch-ups that you need to do. Once that's complete, then you can leave the plate out to dry completely.